us will agree that this is definitely the time for a conscious planet. In today's webinar, we have with us Mr. Siddharth Sharma, Group Chief Sustainability Officer, the Tata Group, and Mr. Tom Thomas, CEO of Praxis, to talk on the subject. Thank you, Mr. Sharma, Mr. Thomas, for being with us and addressing us on this very pertinent subject. On behalf of FLOW and the 17 Pan-India chapters, I welcome you. Popularly known as FLOW, we have 37 successful years of women empowerment initiatives. We are a collective voice for 8,000 members across the country, and also of many more women beyond the membership whose lives we have impacted directly or indirectly. May I now introduce the eminent panelists. Mr. Sharma, you are the Group Chief Sustainability Officer at Tata Sons. In 1992. You've handled important assignments in key ministries. After serving as the internal financial advisor to the 13th and the 14th presidents of India for almost 6 years, you took voluntary retirement from the government in February 2018 and subsequently transitioned to the Tata Group in 2019. You've co-authored a seminal document on Government of India's pensionary liabilities that led to the eventual introduction of the national pension system. As the CSO of one of the largest and the most diverse conglomerates, the Tata Group, you lead the company that is uniquely positioned to help lead the fight against climate change and showcase the benefits of the low carbon economy to the entire world. Our next panelist is Mr. Tom Thomas. Mr. Thomas, you have close to 3 decades of experience in international social development research with expertise across various thematic areas. You have led Praxis for 2 decades on several important assignments, both nationally and internationally, providing critical inputs into development policy and thinking on social development. You are also a proficient facilitator of participatory action research and participatory learning activities in the areas including poverty, health, food security, education, democratic decentralization, livelihoods, and local governance, with a special focus on social equity, as well as more recently on the themes of business and human rights. You've authored and edited books, including Participation Pays, Pathway for 2015, as well as written several articles in internationally reputed journals and books. Talking to this eminent panel is President FLOW, Jahanvi Fukan. As the 37th president of FLOW, Jahanvi leads the organization in its focus towards establishing new growth avenues of empowering women with entrepreneurship capability and professional excellence that will lead them to take up new challenges and avail new opportunities in the digital age. Jahanvi is an entrepreneur, a co-founder of 2 National Tourism Award-winning companies, Jungle Travel India and Assam Bengal Navigation Company under the JTI Group. Her companies are encompassed in travel and hospitality, boutique cruise, river cruising, and small group specialized tours, tea, and textiles, all of which empower young people's livelihood, especially women. President Jahanvi Fukan's focus for this year is facilitating sustainable practices in economic, environmental, as well as social contexts, and also being a catalyst in generating sustainable livelihoods for women. We now request Jahanvi Fukan, President FLOW, to set the context for the webinar today. Jahanvi ji.
Thank you. And a very good afternoon to our guest today, Mr. Siddharth Sharma, Group Chief Sustainability Officer, the Tata Group, and Mr. Tom Thomas, CEO, Praxis. I'm delighted to welcome you both on behalf of FLOW, the women's wing of FICCI, and the 17th chapter that I represent as the national president. Today, I'm reminded of the words of UN's Ban Ki-moon, and I quote, "Sustainable development is the pathway to the future we want for all. It offers a framework to generate economic growth, achieve social justice, exercise environmental stewardship, and strengthen governance." The world is now in the 5th year of the Sustainable Development Goals era. India's progress in the SDG 2030 is crucial for the world, as our country is home to about 1/6 of the world's population. Sustainability has to be the key driver of innovation. As one of the youngest countries in the world, 42% of India's population is under 35 years. Our youth must be engaged to enable India to meet our SDG goals by 2030, and they must be empowered to create business solutions that are environment friendly and sustainable. While our country's per capita emissions are among the lowest in the world, we're also the third largest generator of emissions. Despite being the third largest economy in the world, we are also home to the largest number of people living below international poverty line. Our sheer size and the rapid pace of our growth are the two biggest challenges with regards to our approach to sustainability. Our consumers' lifestyle, especially our dependence on fossil fuels, is the major factor that has led to profound damage done to the natural world. There are many countries around the globe that have sought to make the conscious environmental decisions to bring about change. Countries like the Netherlands and Germany have created well-planned bicycling infrastructure to facilitate their citizens to take up bicycling with ease, thereby reducing petroleum consumption and vehicular emission. Britain has shut down all coal-fired power plants for a coal-free energy sector, and fossil fuels have been replaced by renewables. In our own country, Sikkim has shown the way. Sikkim was declared the world's first 100% organic state in 2018. Sikkim beat 51 other nominations from across the world. Brazil, Denmark, and Quito in Ecuador got the second spot. Coming as I do from Flow's Northeast chapter, it makes me and every Indian proud that this Future Policy Award given by the UN is the Oscar for best policies undertaken towards the attainment of sustainable development goals. This year, the world has been brought to its knees by the unseen enemy of COVID-19. Countries are now confronted with saving lives or saving livelihoods, and the key focus has now come back to sustainability. It is indeed the time for a conscious climate, and we look forward to what our speakers have to say today. I would like to thank Flow Governing Body member Joshna Angara and Flow Bhubaneswar Chapter Chair Haritri Patnaik for giving us the opportunity to listen to you both today. As a token of our gratitude, we would like to present a virtual memento to Mr. Siddharth Sharma and to Mr. Tom Thomas. Right.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, once we go back to the normal, someday we will be able to share those mementos physically and send them to you. So can we start the conversation and ask Mr. Siddharth Sharma to start with your presentation and take us through, please.
So thank you, Janvi, for having me over, and all the other members of FICCI Flow who are present there today for having me over at this webinar. I remember when Jyotsna first contacted me, and she was surprised as to how quickly I said yes to this webinar. And the reason for this is very simple. While I do keep addressing various industry bodies all the time, I think I am a great believer in women empowerment. I am someone who strongly believes that women are not the equal sex, but the much superior sex. And I really, when I see all around me, the kind of sagacity, the kind of balance, the kind of empathy, the kind of multitasking skills that they bring to the table, I think all men have to learn a lot from that. And I am not somebody who's standing for public office, and therefore I don't have to offer platitudes, but I do very sincerely believe in this. And as a recognition of, and also the Tatas very strongly believe in this. If you will look at Tata Sons, 30% of our top deck is women leaders. And 3 out of 10 of us are women leaders. This includes the Group Chief Human Resources Officer, the Chief Economist and Head of Policy Advocacy, and the Group Chief Digital Officer. So 3 out of 10 vital portfolios are handled by our women leaders. Similarly, in my own team at the Tata Sustainability Group, 56% are women. And I think we will continue to raise the bar in this area, and therefore I am very, very delighted to be here. Now, given the constraints of time, it's really not possible to do justice to a topic like sustainability and the journey of the Tata Group, but I'll try my best. So if we can move forward on, can we have the next slide, please? So I am not going into statistics because I think statistics have a way of desensitizing us. There are any number of statistics you can pick up, and we keep reading about every day about the kind of major climate catastrophe that we are facing, the whole world is facing today. It's a climate emergency, and if you look at all these slides, whether it's wildfires, bushfires, floods, melting of the polar ice caps, plastic in the oceans, plastic everywhere, very intense climate events which clearly tell you about how, at what rapidity climate change is taking place, the frequency, the duration, and intensity of extreme events is increasing. Even today morning, when you would have picked up the national newspapers, you would have seen that Death Valley in California has recorded probably the highest temperature of all time at 54.4 degrees Celsius. And also you have news coming in of temperatures at the Arctic, which at this point of time are ranging between 30 to 38 degrees Celsius. And that's unbelievable. And therefore, I don't think it really needs statistics to drive home the point that we are on the edge of a precipice. And the time for action was actually many, many years ago. And if we don't get our act together, we and the planet are really hurtling towards a very, very alarming scenario. Next slide, please. So you see, if you look towards the table, you can just see, even if you look at 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, which are the kind of very ambitious in today's scenario, it seems to be very ambitious. Whether we would be able to meet that 1.5 degrees Celsius target, or whether we would go up to 2 or much beyond 2. But the idea of this slide is to just show you that the difference between half a degree, what half a degree means to climate change. So if you are at 1.5 degrees Celsius, the percentage of population exposed to extreme heat is 14%. If you go up to 2 degrees Celsius over 2050, it becomes worse by 2.6 times. It's 37% of the global population, which is going to be subjected to extreme heat. Similarly, if you look at any other metrics, I mean, these are very illustrative in nature, species loss, whether it's plants, whether it's vertebrates, look at crop yields. Now, the reduction in maize production in the tropics, it'll be 2.3 times worse, just because of a difference of half a degree. Now, can you imagine a scenario? All of India, all of Bangladesh, all of Pakistan, if you look at the subcontinent, we are dependent on the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which is really the food bowl of India and the subcontinent. Now, you imagine a situation where the glaciers start to melt, and there's large-scale mass migration of populations. Apart from the fact that it will be a tremendous human crisis, it'll also be a tremendous food crisis. And therefore, when we talk about climate change, we must also realize that it is the low income and the middle income economies which will be especially vulnerable to the various negative impacts of climate change. So while we do, I agree with you, Janvi, while we do very clearly say that we are amongst the lowest per capita emitters, but given our population, and given the size of the absolute emissions, if movement on climate change has to happen, then it is countries like India and China which have to be at the forefront of that global movement. Next slide, please. And this is again just a question of these are just estimates. These are guessed estimates. You can there is nothing so sacrosanct amongst them, because depending upon the variables that you plot, you can get different figures. But if you look at the natural catastrophe losses intensified by climate change between the period 2017 to 2019, it was estimated at $640 billion. And if you look at the value which is at risk as a result of climate change as we head into 2100 AD, it is $43 trillion. And you have a lot of bodies which work together, and there's one initiative called the Science-Based Target Initiative. And a lot of companies are moving on to the SBTi. And if you look at the kind of sectoral decarbonization that is required to move to those goals of 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius as envisaged in the Paris Agreement, emission reductions in the power sector will be required to the extent of 80%. And in industrial sectors like steel and aluminum, it'll be in the range of 40 to 60%. So as I say, every day that we speak and we don't act, the time window for arresting climate change is going down substantially. Next. I would just like to take you all through, because ultimately these are negotiations that take place at the national level and at the international level. And what were India's NDC commitments, which are valid till 2023, when we will again have a fresh round of discussion. So you see, we basically committed as a country to reducing the emission intensity of our GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030, when you look at it from a baseline of 2005. And we also said that we will increase our non-fossil fuel sources in electrical power capacity to about 40% by 2030. And we would create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide through additional forest and tree cover by 2030. Now, I'm very happy to tell you that whichever independent agency monitors it, there are a lot of independent agencies which rank and evaluate the progress of companies on their NDCs that they have committed to. And I think India is doing reasonably very well. If you look at Climate Tracker and you look at other studies, we are doing very well, especially insofar as the emission intensity of GDP is concerned, and increasing the non-fossil fuel sources in our electric power capacity. On these two parameters, we are doing very well. The area where we are lagging is creating that additional carbon sink through afforestation. And I'm sure over a period of time, Government of India will take to place enabling measures and factors which will get us to the third tier of what we had committed. Next, please. So I will quickly talk about the Tata Group and how we have managed, because we, as you very correctly said, are the largest industrial conglomerate in India. And we are very clearly called the salt to software conglomerate, because if you look at any sector of the Indian economy, you will find that there are Tata companies who are industry leaders in that sector. So whether you go to aviation, whether you go to steel, whether you go to chemicals, whether you go to digital, whether you go to any area of economic activity, we are predominantly present there. We have a huge presence and we have a huge international footprint. And therefore, it's very important for us to align with national priorities, which we've always done, and to take our group on the path of a very, very sustainable future, which we have been doing from the time we were first founded by Jamsetji Tata. And if you see the philosophy, because the one thing I realized being a part of the Tatas, and I knew the Tatas from outside as a government officer for 26 long years before I decided to come over and join the group, is that one, we've been pioneering, we've been innovative, and we've always walked the talk. And if you look at this classic quote from Jamsetji, in a free enterprise, the community is not just another stakeholder in business, but is in fact the very purpose of its existence. And that summarizes the genetic structure, the DNA of the Tatas. We've always been very focused on giving back to our communities much, much more than what we take from them. And that reflects in every single action that we do. Next, please. So just to give you a very broad overview to all your members, because I must confess that before I joined the Tatas, I did have an idea about how big the Tatas were, but I did not have any idea about the footprint. So we are, of course, a global enterprise, and we have 30 companies, and these are publicly listed companies. The total companies are in excess of 100. The publicly listed companies are 30 companies which function across 10 verticals and which are leaders, as I said, whether you look at TCS, whether you look at Tata Consumer Products, whether you look at Tata Steel, whether you look at Tata Chemicals, whether you look at new airlines like Vistara. So there is a whole lot of presence that is there. We operate in more than 100 countries across 6 continents. And I'd just like to spend a minute on the very unique nature of the way the Tatas have been founded. So 66% of the equity share of Tata Sons. Tata Sons is the promoter and the investment holding company of the Tata Group. So Tata Sons holds anywhere between 25 to 75% stake in all the listed companies that we have. And therefore, it's the promoter company. And the promoter company, 66% of that is itself held by philanthropic trusts known as Tata Trusts. And therefore, whatever dividends go back from Tata Sons to Tata Trusts have been utilized for public welfare right from the point of time when the trusts were founded in the 1890s. And that was much before there was concept of CSR, much before there was concept of philanthropy, much before there was the move towards that. That is what I said was the genetic structure. That is what the founding fathers wanted, and that is what is continued. As a group, our revenues are in excess of $113 billion, and we collectively employ over 720,000 employees, which means if you look at it, private sector-wise, we are the largest, and we are the second largest after the government of India. And the combined market capitalization of our companies is in excess of 160 billion US dollars. Next. And as I said, we were pioneers in many things. We talked about many things much before the world talked about them. So if you look at this slide, we gave India its first integrated steel plant, its first luxury hotel, hydropower, Tata Power was there right from the beginning. Civil aviation, Air India was actually part of the Tatas and founded by JRD. The first software services company, Tata Consultancy Services. And then if you look at employee benefit measures, much before the welfare state came in, much before India got independence, and much before Government of India enacted labor-friendly laws, you had the Tatas in 1877 giving pension and gratuity, 1895 Workmen's Accident Compensation Scheme, 1901 the Workers' Provident Fund Scheme, 1912 the 8-hour working day, 1934 a profit sharing bonus, 1921 maternity benefits for working women, 1917 schooling facilities for children, 1915 free medical aid. Now, at no point of time is the private sector at that point of time was it compelled to do this. It came from the fact that we do what we think is right. It came from a very strong belief in human values. It came from a very strong belief in ethics. And that far preceded labor law enactments, as I said. Next. So the Tata Sustainability Group was because we recognized the value of sustainability, and the Tata Sustainability Group came into existence in 2014 as a center of excellence. And it was to oversee the environmental, the social, and the governance imperatives of the Tata Group. So how is it that we have how do we view sustainability at Tata's? So we have a governance structure, we have a sustainability policy, and as I told you, we operate almost in every sector of the Indian economy. We have 30 listed companies. Now, obviously, their operating scenarios vary from sector to sector. It is not one monolithic structure. It is a structure made up of different companies in different operating environments. And therefore, we had to look at what will be the common minimum, what will be the group key performance indicators for all of our companies on which we will track their progress towards the sustainability framework. Next. So the Group Sustainability Council is basically the apex body which is chaired by the Group CSO, which is me at the moment, and it comprises the MDs and CEOs of some of our most important companies. And feeding into this are the sustainability working councils. And there's a lot of movement in terms of ideas and thoughts between these two tiers. So if there has to be any directional change, if there has to be any movement of the needle, so as to say, it is the Tata Group Sustainability Council which takes a view on it, and then it goes to the group chairman, and that is how our policies come into shape and are defined. Next. So this is basically the Tata Sustainability Policy, which basically commits that we will incorporate elements of sustainability into every area of business decision making. So whatever we do, there will be these elements which will be incorporated, whether it is in terms of product stewardship, whether it is in terms of ethical behavior, whether it is in terms of our engagement with our larger ecosystem, whether it's employees, whether it's suppliers, whether it's our customers. And that common thread of sustainability is present across everything that we do. And our commitment is that our companies will aspire for global sustainability leadership in the sectors in which we operate. I'm very, very happy to tell you that the most reputed sustainability body organization, the GlobeScan, which tracks the sustainability progress of companies across the world. This year, in its GlobeScan Sustainability Leaders Report 2020, for the first time has the Tata Group making an entry into the international rankings in the top 15. We rank at number 13. We are the first Indian group. We are the first Asian group. Prior to this, we used to figure in the Asia Pacific rankings for sustainability leaders. Last year, we were number 2 after Toyota in Asia Pacific. And this time, we are the only Asian company, the only Indian company to be in the top 15, ranking at number 13, along with the likes of Unilever, Patagonia, IKEA, etc. Next. So these are the performance indicators. We track this on an yearly basis, and we have what we call a state of sustainability report, which we submit to our top leadership, the group chairman and the MDs and CEOs of the companies, as to how we are making progress. And there are various metrics that we do it. So if you look at environment, I'll just take this. So we are tracking emissions, we are tracking energy, we are tracking water usage, and we are tracking solid waste. One metric branched out into a number of action areas, and we track progress and see how we do on an year-to-year basis. If you look at investors and regulators, there's board oversight in each of our companies. There's sustainability reporting. Disclosure is very important these days because all your institutional investors want to know how companies are doing. And therefore, disclosure is of primary importance. And all our companies, publicly listed companies, report using global frameworks, whether it is integrated reporting, whether it is GRI. Next. We are probably the only company in India, the only group which looks at disaster response. So when you're looking at communities, so there are the elements of CSR, and then there's disaster response. So we are probably the only group in India which looks at disaster response in a very structured manner. We've operated more than 10 disaster responses since 2014. We've committed almost about 150 crores across these 10 disaster responses. If you look at employees, what are the metrics? They are volunteering. We are amongst the top 10 global volunteering programs in the world. Our employees volunteered about 1.52 million hours last year in corporate volunteering. We also look at diversity, we look at safety, and then we, as I said, with eye on customers, we look at product stewardship, we look at our value chain partners. So we ensure that there is complete integration, both backwards and forwards. Next. The focus areas are climate change, water, resource efficiency, CSR, disaster response, volunteering. And we are moving the needle on all these areas. Next. So these are the key steps. When we started in 2014, when we took it as a group level imperative, we decided that we will have the TSG coming into existence and we will launch the Tata Climate Change Policy. Then we did carbon footprinting and developed low carbon strategies. Then we did capability building and creation of change agents. And we followed it up with external reporting and advocacy around this. Next, please. And the climate change policy was, of course, as you can see here, was articulated by Mr. Ratan Tata, signed off by him, and it is something we very, very closely monitor and follow. Next. So what have we done? In these 6 years, as I said, we've moved to the global arena. We've been recognized as sustainability leaders in the global framework. And how have we achieved it? We did a carbon footprinting of 50 plus Tata companies and developed a low carbon strategy around them. We have a Tata Business Excellence model. And since 2010, so we appraise our companies on business excellence. And one of the frameworks that we add to it is an assessment on climate change, how the companies are moving on climate change. Internally, we trained almost 800 climate change champions and 150 energy champions who would take the message of sustainability across to our individual companies. All our top leadership, that's not only Tata Sons, but the top leadership of the companies, which is the C-suite executives and the MDs and CEOs, to sensitize them, we took them to a program which was run by the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, so that they saw for themselves firsthand how imperative it is to have business strategies centered around sustainability. And as I said, we disclose our climate change progress through widely accepted reporting frameworks, international reporting frameworks. And we also move the needle through our participation of very, very key bodies on the international arena. And these are the Energy Transitions Commission in Europe, where I am the commissioner, one of the commissioners of the ETC, and also the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, where again, I represent the Tatas as a council member. And therefore, we have a lot of learnings that we take from them. And there's a lot of sharing of best practices and advocacy that takes place in these forums. Next. Now, what are the major initiatives? Again, these are completely illustrative. As I said, in 20 minutes, it's not possible to list out an exhaustive thing, but you would see that Tata Power has recently set a target of achieving 40% of its power generation through non-fossil fuel sources by 2025. It's developed the world's largest rooftop solar system of 12 megawatts in Punjab. Tata Steel is doing a lot of activity around now. It's a hard to abate sector. Steel is a very hard to abate sector, but there's a lot of progress happening. In fact, the Tata Steel Europe has built a 20 million pound Hisarna pilot plant, with the objective of reducing CO2 emissions. I have personally been involved as the head of TSG. TSG has been involved in looking at means and ways of ensuring that we can get to net neutrality in steel operations by 2050 in India also. So it's not only Europe, because in places like Europe and other countries, it is more regulatory in nature because the regulations have come in which mandate companies to move towards net neutrality. Here in India, in spite of there not being a regulation at this stage, I'm sure at some point of time there will be a regulation around this, but we've already started the initiative, and I think we are working around that. If you look at Tata Motors, it joined the RE100 initiative in 2016 and has committed to transitioning to 100% renewable electricity. And Motors and JLR, Jaguar Land Rover, have included electric and hybrid vehicles in their product portfolio and are working closely with various players to develop charging infrastructure. Similarly, Tata Chemicals has a 16.7 million pound project, which is going to be the first industrial scale carbon capture and utilization demonstration plant. The Tata Group's first industrial scale CCUS, a demonstration plant to trap emissions for use in sodium bicarbonate manufacturing. Next. And then you can see there are any number. I would not like to go into each one of them. I think we will leave the presentation with you because there would be constraints of time, but there's a lot of water recharging happening. Because we also happen to be in areas like Tata Coffee. Now, Tata Coffee, which is one of our companies, you know, it's highly water intensive. A lot of these operations are very water intensive. And therefore, we have to make sure that there's water security, not only for our communities, but also for the sake of business continuity. Next. Similarly, in the circular economy, you can see Jaguar Land Rover's Reality project. It reforms aluminium from end-of-life vehicles into new material to build next-generation products. So you're basically reusing it again, and it helps in reducing the carbon dioxide emissions and amount of virgin aluminium that you would otherwise use for production. Similarly, with Tata Power, and the Tata Consumer Product Factory in Eagles Cliff has been a zero to landfill site since 2012. Next. And I talked to you about disaster responses. And as we go into climate change, the incidence of disaster response will increase because cataclysmic events will increase in intensity, in duration, in frequency. And our wider stakeholder community has a lot of expectations from us in corresponding and responding to disaster events. And therefore, we went into it in a big way. We are not government, but we are very actively, and therefore we cannot be first responders, but we very closely coordinate with government, state governments and the central government. And we go into relief and rehabilitation works as soon as we are able to enter a disaster response area. And if you will see on the right-hand side, more than 5.5 lakh people have been positively impacted by this. And 158 crores have been spent across 19 districts in 8 states. And this is just at the group level response. Next. This is a geographical map of all the disasters. So we've been there in every major disaster, whether it was the J&K floods, whether it was the Uttarakhand floods, whether it was the Nepal earthquake, whether it was Assam, Bihar. So in terms of climatic events, we've handled them. In COVID-19, which was a non-traditional disaster, a black swan event, once in a century, you've read about how the Tatas have collaborated and partnered with government. And our contribution, if you measure it just in monetary terms, is to the extent of 1,500 crores for COVID-19. Next. Corporate social responsibility, I said, you know, both the Tata trusts, which are philanthropic, and our companies, look at corporate social responsibility very, very closely. We have our CSR committees. We have a very, very progressive vision. So we don't look at it as a one-off. We look at it in multi-year projects which deliver value to stakeholders. And therefore, a lot of the areas that we kind of concentrate on are healthcare, education, livelihood, women empowerment, strengthening of services. And I must tell you that if you look at the Tata Trust, that is, of course, a philanthropic organization and doesn't qualify as CSR, but the money goes into exactly those areas. And if you look at the Tata Group, we would be contributing more than 11% of India's CSR expenditure, India's CSR spending on a year-to-year basis. And volunteering, I already told you, we look at it again as a way of giving back to our communities, of partnering them in various initiatives. And we've done 1.52 million hours of volunteering last year. We have 2 or 3 major programs. We have the Tata Volunteering Week, which is held every year biannually, 3rd of March and 5th of September. Then we have a Pro Engage, which is again held biannually. And this is more intense because volunteers commit to giving 1 to 6 months of their time to part-time projects and helping people and helping organizations and NGOs in areas which are of mutual benefit or what they see will bring the maximum impact on the ground. And then also we have a disaster response volunteers. These are volunteers, employees who come from companies who are trained into disaster response. So we have DR volunteers, we have project managers, we have procurement officers. So there is a whole cadre which is devoted only to disaster response. And every year since 2015, we have been clocking in excess of 1 million volunteering hours. Next. And these are just some of the recognitions. We don't do anything for recognitions. The Tata Group likes to be very understated in what we do. In fact, what I would say is that we perform without making a hue and cry about it. We don't go and talk about our achievements. We put solid work in the ground and we ensure that we deliver. But these are some areas where we've been recognized, whether it's in volunteering, whether it's in terms of the Dow Jones sustainability indices, whether it's in terms of being the #1 brand in India for many years running now, and the first Indian corporate to launch a consolidated SDGs report. So I think these are all areas which I think the world recognizes that the Tatas do a good job and they walk the talk. And I can assure every member here that we will continue to do that because that's part of our organizational ethos and that's part of the way we are. I've already talked to you about gender diversity. I've talked to you about 30% of the women of leaders in Tata Sons being women. My own team, you can see Vistara leads with 42% women in the workforce. TCS is 36 now. That 36% is a huge number because please remember that TCS employs in excess of 400,000 people. And if you're looking at 400,000 people and almost a 40% workforce comprising women, you're looking at women in the range of 150,000 for one single company. And that is the kind of commitment that we bring to the table. I think we've come to the end of the presentation. I hope I was able to give you a broad overview. It was very, very broad because we did not have the time to go in depth because of time constraints, but I hope it's given you a broad prism of what we do at Tata's and how we move the needle on sustainability initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We know that Tata is one of the most respected brands for our country. And now may we present the memento to Mr. Tom Thomas. This is a virtual memento from us, from Mr. Tom Thomas. Thank you, IT.
Thank you so much.
May I ask Mr. Thomas to please start your presentation now.
Thank you, Janvi. Thank you, FICCI Flo, for inviting me to speak with you. It's definitely an honor to be in the midst of so many business women. And as Siddharth was saying, I think it is women leadership that is likely to lead us to a better planet, better life, and all of that. I totally agree with that. I don't have a presentation. I'm not. I'm more better at conversations rather than presenting. So what I'll try and do is try and make brief observations.
Yes.
The topic is very broad, as Siddharth was saying. So just give a brief observations and then probably give some time for conversations after that. So actually, Siddharth has actually made my task easy by outlining most of the issues, quite a bit on the related issues as well. So what I thought I'll say, I want to touch upon three key points. First is the whole vision that you have put out. The second is the reality on the ground. And third, I think possible actions. So firstly, I think if we talk about the vision of a conscious planet, I think it's an absolutely timely one. It's extremely timely because I think we are definitely bursting at the seams of many of the parameters of what we could call as a safe operating space for humanity. So there are enough studies that have been done. If you look at a combination of parameters and look at, like, for example, nitrogen, like land use, like water use, climate change, so on and so forth. If you, a combination of those parameters, if you look at it, we are either bursting at seams on some of those, or we've already burst and gone beyond. So the carrying capacity of the planet is definitely being tested. And therefore, I think it couldn't have come earlier than this. I mean, it's so timely that you're looking at and conversing this idea of a conscious planet. I think it is also important that FICCI Flow is taking this up. There is a lot of conversation, be it in the civil society sector or in other sectors, about a conscious planet and the need to rethink where we are going. FICCI Flow leading this, I think, is extremely important because I think business are in a sense in the middle of the possibilities of destroying or regenerating the planet. And I'm sure that by choosing this theme, you are definitely looking at the latter of looking at regenerating the planet. And who better than women leadership to look at that? I completely agree and believe that this is a good initiative taken up by Flow and something that can be done. Now, the complexity of this task is that the very engine that drives business is also at the core of destroying the planet, which is, mindless capitalism. If that is, as it is practiced, with the prime motto of maximizing profit. We've heard Siddharth and Tata Group's efforts at looking at it differently. And I'm sure most of you have looked at, you've heard about the triple bottom line, which is to look beyond profit and to look at the whole idea of profit, people, and planet. So all of those to be looked at in equal measures. But then when you look at policies around us or this whole rush
trillion economy. And if the debates around the current environment impact assessment is any indicator, I think we are still lagging behind somewhere, both at the philosophical level as well as on the ground realities. Having said that, I think there are also worldwide and within India efforts to look at the idea of regenerative capitalism. This whole idea of not throwing the entire idea of capitalism, but to look at it from a regenerative point of view. Part of which I think through examples Siddharth has already outlined in terms of how that can be practiced on the ground. Now coming to reality, we must accept that we are living in an unequal society with huge gaps, both in terms of wealth as well as social status. And both are a problem in creating a conscious planet. And we must recognize that price of inequality is very, very high. And, you know, there is this work of Richard Wilkinson and others called the spirit level, and why they talk about equality is better for everyone. I don't think we need to go beyond just this experience of pandemic to realize that why equality is better rather than inequality. Just take, for example, if people don't have adequate housing, if they don't have fair living wages, and if they don't have access to services, then they are not going to be able to adhere to the protocols that are prescribed by the COVID pandemic. And that is not a problem for just that population, but it is a problem for everyone. No one can be safe. And therefore, my argument would be that it comes back to saying, and this pandemic must definitely tell us and point us towards the need for making sure that there is more equality, and equality at least at the very basic level. Basic levels of adequate housing, basic levels of fair wages, and basic levels of, I think, access to healthcare, education, and these services. Now, coming to the practices and in terms of business responsibility and how our experiences in tracking business responsibility in the country has been. Access is also the convener of what is called Corporate Responsibility Watch, which is a civil society coalition of both organizations as well as individuals looking at business practices in the country. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this whole business responsibility reports that have been mandated by SEBI. For now, it started with 100, and now it is top 1,000 listed companies must report on business responsibilities every year. And we've been tracking this business responsibility reports for the last 5 years. And while there are some encouraging and positive trends, there are also disturbing findings that we find even amongst the top in the industry. If you look at, let's take women. Siddharth was talking about very good figures, and Tata's in many ways is an exception in than the rule. So if we look at last year's business responsibility reports, which we analyzed, 53% of the top Indian companies have a male to female employee ratio of 10:1 or worse. And a total of 103 out of that is about more than 30% of the companies actually reported a reduction in the number of women employees. Only 13% of the companies assessed have proactively disclosed having employees from scheduled castes, scheduled tribe, other backward classes, OBC, and so on and so forth. And this becomes important when we talk about gaps, not only in terms of wealth, but also in terms of social groups. Over 70% of businesses have reported either 0 or less than 1% of disabled employees. Since you talked about Janvi, Northeast, and you are an entrepreneur from Northeast, the entire Northeast received just under 30 crores of the CSR funds, while Maharashtra itself got something like 2,500 crores. So that's the kind of geographic disparity we are talking about.
Yeah.
So there is a problem. So there is a problem on the ground, both in terms of businesses practices as well as leadership of these businesses. Now, come to possible actions. I think I was going to quote what Siddharth said about Jamshedji, talking about communities as being the Raisen Deatre of business and not just one of the stakeholders. Let me quote another business that I know quite closely and I was initially very closely following. This is a group called Alacrity Foundation, which used to be Alacrity Housing, which used to be based out of Chennai. And they believed that their mission statement said that to try and prove that organized business, when deeply committed to values, is best equipped to lead society to a better quality of life. And that is quite true. Businesses have a huge impact and huge potential. Whether that is being realized or not is not the question, but it has a huge potential. It is a connector, it is a driver, it's a source of uh, energy, and therefore I think it has huge potential. And we know that CSR is not the answer. It's not just about how you spend your money, it is also about how you make it. And therefore, responsible business and human rights, respecting human rights, all of this becomes extremely important. And I think in here, to me, the biggest driver for a good business is its leadership. And to me, I think, again, as Siddharth was saying, I didn't even think twice before saying yes to joining today's panel, because I think women-led development or businesses definitely have a way forward. I think men have had their run, and we have destroyed more than we've created. And I am sure that it is that role and is critical. And I'm so happy that I'm amongst business leaders today who are likely to be taking this forward. And I think at the national level, most of you would have heard the BRRs, or the Business Responsibility Report, emerges from the national, what was called the National Voluntary Guidelines. And last year, the revised version is called the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct. And that act, it kind of puts fiduciary duties on the directors of a company, and I quote here, that to promote the objects of the company for the benefit of members as a whole, of its members as a whole, and in the best interest of the company, its employees, the shareholders, the community, and the protection of environment. So in a sense, it is coming from the triple bottom line kind of baseline to respect not just profit, but profit, people, as well as the planet. There are a lot of, I will actually conclude because I know we have kind of run beyond the time. There are resources available in terms of guides and manuals, ranging from how to actually file your BRR in a proactive way, how to do energy audits, how to do, or guidelines to even simple things like guidelines to plastic-free conferences, and so on and so forth. On Praxis, Partners in Change, as well as Corporate Responsibility Watch websites. I will definitely share those links with all of you. And I will stop here, thanking once again for this opportunity, and I'm open to more conversations. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tom. That was very interesting to see what you have to say, and what we would especially like to know from you, that how can flow, and both you gentlemen have agreed that the women, it's about time women took a more active part in running the planet. Maybe we would do a better job in the years to come. But tell us, how can FICCI flow, be engaged in this codification that you're talking about? Is it like an environmental index, a business index that we can also follow up with the corporate companies?
I for the BRRs,
Yes. Is it like a environmental index, like what the Tata Group has come about and showing the way to the world and being the top 30 from the world? How can Tata also teach the rest of the Indian corporates to take this forward? How can flow be involved? Is there a sort of a index that the country, the world is going to follow? Can we be part of that?
If I may very briefly say, I think the BRRs are based on what I said, the national guidelines. What was national voluntary guidelines is now national guidelines, which outlines 9 principles. And these principles are things like businesses should conduct themselves with integrity in a manner that is ethical, transparent, and accountable. Businesses should provide goods and services in a manner that is sustainable and safe. Businesses should respect and promote well-being of all employees, including those in their value chains, and so on and so forth. There is this list of 9 principles that are outlined there. And these are also stemming from the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, which is essentially on 3 pillars of protect, respect, and remedy. So these are the key pillars. And I think Flow definitely and its members can, even though this is only currently mandatory for top 1,000 listed companies, I think leadership is when things are done which are not mandated, but as Siddharth was saying, which are visionary, which are, I think, future looking. And I think in a few kind of theme which you have chosen of a conscious planet, I think it becomes extremely good if Flow is to take leadership and look at guiding principles, starting from UN guiding principles to the guidelines that are currently available. This is available on the Ministry of Corporate Affairs website as well. And we'll be more than happy to be part of this along with Tatas and others to help in this discussion.
More about it. Perhaps Mr. Sharma can also.
Yes, so there are 2 or 3 things which I wanted to say, and I heard Tom also. And the point is, if you look at the world today and if you see COVID-19, it's just exposed to fault lines. The fault lines were always there. And you see, from the point of time when I was a student, and probably when my father was a student and my grandfather was a student, we've always talked about reduction of income inequality. And there have been various theories which have gone. One was a trickle-down effect. One was, so governments have talked about it all over the world. But the fact is, inequality has increased. You've had reforms and you've had economic reforms all over the world. We've had it in India. And the unfortunate aspect is that the poor have got poorer and the rich have got richer. And therefore, when I say, and I think what Tom very correctly said right now, is that, yes, one thing is what is mandated. One thing is what is the document and what is the stated letter. But what's more important, where flow can come in all those areas where you can influence, in the companies that you lead, in the companies that you may work for, in every single area of policy advocacy. Can you actually move the needle? Because what's more important is the intent and the work which centers around that intent. And therefore, if you look at, as I said, when Jamsetji was founding the Tata Group, and when they started to bring in these progressive measures for women,
Exactly.
creches, maternity leave, etc. Now, to what extent, and even today, you realize that the needle has really not moved in terms of women representation, as he gave to you the statistics. I gave to you statistics for the Tata Group, which is an outlier in almost everything. But he gave to you statistics for what is the general picture. And the general picture still continues to be dismal. And as leaders, as individuals, how much of empathy can you bring into it? How much of your own experiences can you get into policy formulation? That is, and then once that policy is formulated, how do you drive it across? Because leadership is all about vision and execution. And you need to have both in ample measure. And I think, we should always be, I may be stating something which is very cliche, but you should always be the change that you want to see.
Correct.
And I have always believed that in whatever I have done, that can we as individuals make an impact? Yes, we can. We can forget the bigger picture. Let's just focus on that area which we are responsible for, and let us inform it with dedication, commitment, empathy, and you will see the difference. And that's all that all of you need to do. You need to bring that on the table.
Thank you. We will talk further. We are enthused, and this is the passion that we all carry. And we are here to learn from you, gentlemen. May I ask my Flow Bangalore chairperson, Jyotika Kalra, to ask her question. Jyotika, can you come in? Jyotika is joining us from Bangalore.
Ma'am, I think she's disconnected for some reason.
It's the network. Okay, next, may I ask, why don't I ask my Flow Bhubaneswar chapter chair, Savitri Patnaik, to give our next question. Go on, Dharitri.
Good evening, and it was indeed a pleasure listening to Mr. Sharma and Tom. The question I planned to ask, I'm dropping that. I want to ask something different. After listening to both of you, I feel and I was in the social development sector for 2 decades, I still am, but I'm also an entrepreneur. Things are quite different on the ground. So, and you're really faced with a lot of issues, a lot of dilemmas. And it's not easy to really what your values and principles are and to stick to them. And we've seen like many instances of very large corporate houses cutting thousands of trees and government collaborating with them. And they would be filing their corporate sustainability reports and getting awards. So, there's a huge gap between what is real and what's happening, and how do we go about it? And what would you have to say, both of you?
So I can answer that. Can you hear me, Dharitri? So I can answer that in, I think ultimately, as I said, it goes to genetic structure, DNA, what you believe in. And do you walk the talk? It's very easy to come out with these reports. These reports may not be worth the paper on which they are written, because you can collude with the system. And unfortunately, whether it is India or any other country, you do have these instances of rampant collusion and trying to portray a picture which is actually not. And when I was a civil servant for 26 long years, this is a question which all of us are faced with when you are in the districts. When you are district magistrate, when you are subdivisional magistrate, etc. Now, there are a lot of you who will go and join the tide. There is what you call a politician, industrialist, bureaucrat nexus, right? But there are others who will stand their ground. And whether you stand that ground as a corporate, as I said, it is well documented that The Tatas have always stood their ground and have refused to compromise on principles of ethics, on doing things the right way, on not taking. Individuals have. As a civil servant myself, I have many of these dilemmas. Many of my colleagues, and the unfortunate part is I always say that in our rush for TRP, we only highlight the nexus. We do not highlight those officers who stand their ground and take the harder path but still work. And it is because of those 10% officers that India works. And therefore, I would expect that don't expect it to be an easy ride out there. It is not. It is infested. But the question is, as I said, what will differentiate you from anyone else, what differentiates us at the Tatas from anyone else, or what differentiates honest, conscientious individuals and officers from anyone else, is your ability to take the rough with the smooth and to stand for what you believe in. It doesn't matter what the world around does. It's just a question of your own principles and your own ethics. If you're able to stand by them, I'm sure in the long run, you will see that there will be change.
Thank you so much.
Just to add to that, I think I would also say that the task at hand is huge and the issues are structural in nature. It's not something that you can just overcome by, applying external ointments, so to speak. So I think along with leadership, which Raj very rightly pointed out, and I know from the experience I spoke about the Alacrity housing, I know how they stood that leadership by whatever commitment and the values they stood by it, refused to pay bribes, refused to compromise on any of these, etc. So leadership part, I think that's one part. This cannot negate the idea of people's action. I think the people's action is also important because we are dealing not just with business, we are also dealing with state and the nexus of the state, the business, the media, and so on and so forth, the pillars of so-called democracy. When that colludes, I think finally the arbitrator of that, if it is not state, then will have to be collective vision of people. So people's actions, people, whether it is, I'm not talking about just a, uprising or a resistance or a boycott, but also conscious efforts by, be it a consumer, be it an investor, be it the people who are employed in companies and so on and so forth. The whole gamut of people, I think, need to be coming together in this effort. It's a challenge, but I think women leadership, I feel that can do the trick much better than what we have done.
Thanks, Tom.
And we completely agree, Tom. Okay. So next we have our, may I ask, my floor governing body member, Joshna Angara of Hyderabad. She has a question for you.
Thank you so much, firstly, both Mr. Siddharth and Mr. Thomas for coming on the show with us. Truly appreciate that. I have two parts of my question. One part of it is specifically to Mr. Siddharth, and the second part is to both. So I'll go with the second part first, and then move to the first part. The second part is, the government itself is not walking the talk. We know that. They are not implementing the rigorous standards, especially in the eco-sensitive zones. Polluting industries are all functioning the way they are happening. Now, that's one. And the other thing is that, do you think it's important that we bring in sustainability awareness as a subject itself right from school? Like ethics is gone out of the school. So if we bring in this, maybe we'll be able to build the pipeline with the right attitude. So that was my thought. I'd like to hear both your thoughts on that. And the first part of the question, which I'm actually speaking now for Mrs. Sharma, is Flow has started a first of its kind, 100% women-owned, women-driven industrial park in Hyderabad. We've got about 25, 26 manufacturing units coming up there, all in the green industry category. And having said that, we would like to understand if the Tata Group would come forward to guide us, to help us. You spoke so much about the diversity, how you promote women and stuff. If you could help us there, maybe formulating certain sustainability practices for all these industries to take forward, we would love that, Mr. Sharma.
Okay, so do you want the first part answered first or the second part? Because
whatever, either way, either way.
Okay, so insofar as the Tatas are concerned, I definitely, when we are able to kind of move out of these business travel restrictions, etc., I would like to come and see what this is all about and how we can help you if we can.
Yes.
I cannot give a blanket commitment. We will have to see. We will have to come, as I said, we'll have to explore it better and to see whether a partnership can be evolved with the industrial park that you're talking about. And if so, which entity within the Tatas will be the best suited to take that forward? So that is what I can say at the moment on that. On the second part, I think Tom made a very valid observation earlier, which was that if you see the latest draft environmental impact assessment that has been circulated, there have been a lot of responses from civil society, from individuals, etc. So it is possible in the framework of governance when you start to, because I have been a part of the system, and I don't think that there are competing pulls and pressures when you frame any policy. And at some times it may appear that yes, there is a slant towards a particular area or a particular industry. I think the best way to correct that is one, of course, civil society participation. As we know, any policy is thrown open for consultation and for public comment. Those comments have come. I'm sure government will examine them, and there will be hopefully course corrections. If there are supposed to be course corrections, and they will be applied. There's also the forum of standing committees, parliamentary standing committees, and they look at draft legislation and rule making very, very, in a very detailed manner. And there is an examination which happens quite in a bipartisan spirit. I hope that happens. So insofar as talking about environmental laws is concerned, I will restrict my remarks to that. But yes, I think it is time for us in India to mainstream sustainability. And sustainability has actually, if you've seen, been a part of Indian practices, both in the rural and the urban areas. It's not something which is new to us. The only thing is that can we begin it at home? Can we teach our children that, all right, you must switch off a fan when you are not sitting there? Can we look at public transport instead of individual vehicles? Can we take a bath with a bucket of water rather than shower ourselves? I mean, if you look at the smallest areas, I completely agree. The thing has to begin from the individual, and it has to be reinforced in the educational system. So it has to kind of, this is one thing that I am also trying to do in my role as the group CSO of the Tatas. I am trying to address the youth. And I'm trying to kind of bring this awareness that it's necessary for us to move the needle. And it's not only the government which will move the needle or the corporate sector. The fundamental person who will move the needle is the individual himself. So that's my take. I'll leave it to
I would agree that there is a lot that individual is the driver, and therefore we talk about the whole idea of the politics of all of this being not just in expressing those politics, but also in practicing those politics, whether it is about water use, energy use, of plastics, regeneration, recycling, all of this. I could agree more that yes, some of these issues need to be inculcated right from the beginning, as you rightly said, be it in school curriculums or otherwise. How much of ethical business is taught even in these schools of India? Very little. How much of human rights issues are taught in the B schools of India? So there is a problem there. There is a systemic problem. As I was speaking to Daritri also, the idea of structural issues. There are structural impediments, and those need to be overcome by a combination of, I think, individual efforts as well as policy changes. And policy changes often does not happen that easily through these online consultations or anything. It needs to really happen. Change happens when there is a pressure for change as well. So that kind of I'm not just talking about lobbying kind of for change. Lobbying can be of many kinds. People can also make sure that change is brought in. You have the case of Coca-Cola being sent out of Kerala, Plachimada, for example, or the agitation which lost lives in Thoothukudi against Sterlite. All of that are people's actions. And that cannot be, I think in a democracy, people's action, people's engagement. And when I say people, I would also include this whole idea of educating children, as you rightly said, from the beginning.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was, this is such a vast topic, and there's so many things we are learning from you. But I want to reiterate here that for all of us at Flow, the sense of responsibility, like it's about giving back. We in Flow too want to give back. And if we can handhold with you all in any way to take the message forward of the awareness that we need to create from the child, from the women in the household to the communities, that everyone is a stakeholder. And we can't just demand the government or the private sector or XYZ. We have to do it ourselves. So when I came in this year as the president, I'd come in with the hope that we would talk on the mission of sustainable practices and sustainable livelihoods for women's economy empowerment. And with that, we want to continue, and thank you for giving us the time and an opportunity to listen to the best practices. But we are enthused and we want to do our bit. If there's any opportunity to work together, there's any index or anything in the corporate sphere that we can take up, join hands with your group, with practice, we are here to work with you. May I ask my Flow Senior Vice President, Jayanti Dalmia, to please give us the vote of thanks. Jayanti, over to you.
Namaskar. George Bernard Shaw had rightly said, progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their mind cannot change anything. Today's session was an eye-opener to all of us in many ways, and I am sure we can and we will consciously make changes to our lives to save our planet. Thank you, Mr. Siddharth Sharma, for addressing us and talking about the pertinent points of working towards a conscious planet, and the fabulous work that the Tatas are doing under your guidance. Mr. Tom Thomas, thank you for sharing your experiences and enlightening us on the general culture in India. Sincere thanks to GB member Jyotsna Angara and Chairperson Bhuvneshwar Chakrabarti Patnaik for helping us put together this session. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you and namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.